That's my ex-girlfriend. Mountain Man bought the fat girl at auction, found his lost love. Start her at $50, the auctioneer bellowed. Strong back, big bones. She'll work hard if you don't let her eat too much. The crowd in Millbrook's dusty town square roared with laughter. On the rough plank platform, with her wrists bound in front of her by coarse hemp rope, stood Violet May Hartwell, 28, widow, debtor, and, according to the men jeering below, too fat for her own good. The wind tugged at the loose strands of her brown hair as she stared at the warped boards beneath her boots, doing everything she could not to meet anyone's eyes. Her dress, once navy blue and neatly pressed, now hung wrinkled and tight over generous hips and a soft belly. The buttons at her chest strained each time she drew a shaky breath. "She'll eat you out of house and home," a man in a sweat-stained bowler hat shouted. "Knock $10 off just to feed her," another cackled. The auctioneer, Horace Drummond, wiped sweat from his thick mustache and forced a grin. "Come on, gentlemen. Violet May Hartwell owes her late husband's family $150 under the law. Her labor contract is perfectly legal, $50 to start. Who'll take her?" Silence. Not one hand lifted. Violet's cheeks burned. These people had watched her walk through town for years, had nodded politely when she passed with her husband on her arm. Now, without him, they could finally say out loud what they'd always thought, that she was too large, too plain, too much. $40, Horace barked, a little desperate now. Still nothing, only whispers. She got bigger since the funeral. He dropped dead and she still kept eating. A woman's voice, sharp as a knife, cut through. No man wants to drag that up his stairs every night. The laughter was louder this time, and Violet's vision blurred. Her fingers curled around the rope until her nails bit into her palms. She wished, for one wild second, that the ground would simply open and swallow her whole. $30, Horace snapped. $30 for two good arms and a stout body that can scrub floors, haul water, wash linens. Last reduction. Again, the square stayed still. A wagon rattled past on the far side of the street. Someone coughed. A dog barked. The humiliation settled over Violet like a second skin. Not only was she being sold like a mule, she wasn't even worth the starting bid. Farther back, near the edge of the crowd, a tall man in worn buckskin paused with a crate of provisions at his feet. He'd only meant to come down off Blue Ridge Mountain to buy flour, salt, and ammunition before snow closed the passes. He hated auctions, hated the way people treated the poor like livestock. But that voice, the choked, familiar catch in it when she whispered, "Please, God, somebody, help me," even though she knew no one would. Silas Thorne's heart lurched. He pushed his way forward, green eyes locked on the woman on the platform. Softer now, fuller, lines of grief around her mouth. But he would have known her anywhere. Violet, the girl who'd once sworn she'd marry him under the maple by the river, the girl whose parents had sold her off to a rich old man 5 years ago while Silas watched, helpless and furious. 25, then, Horace snapped, voice cracking. "For pity's sake, gentlemen, I can't give her away." More laughter. Violet's shoulders hunched. A tear slid down and dropped onto the sun-bleached boards. Before Horace could drop the price again, a low, steady voice carried over the noise. $100. The square went dead quiet. Heads turned. The crowd parted just enough for Violet to see him clearly for the first time. Tall, broad-shouldered, hair sun-bleached at the tips, jaw rough with a red-brown beard. His coat smelled of pine and wood smoke, his boots of trail dust and river mud. Silas Thorne. Her Silas. Horace blinked. Did you say 100, sir? Silas didn't look at the auctioneer. He couldn't take his eyes off Violet's stunned, wet gaze. His voice was rough, scraped with 5 winters alone on the mountain. "That's my ex-girlfriend," he said. "I'll take her." And as every shocked face in Millbrook swung from the mountain man to the fat girl on the block, their lives, shattered once already, tilted on their hinges a second time. If you were standing in that square with them, watching this mess unfold, where in the world would you be listening from right now? Violet sat hunched on the bench outside the cafe, hands trembling around the bowl of broth Silas had bought her. The steam rose in soft curls, warming her cheeks, but she still shivered, part cold, part shame, part disbelief. She hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. Not properly. The Hartwell family had rationed her food down to scraps before dragging her to the auction block. Even now, as she lifted the spoon, she moved cautiously, as though someone might slap it from her hand. Silas watched her, arms crossed loosely over his chest, back against the cafe's wooden post. He didn't rush her, didn't prod her, didn't touch her, but he didn't look away either. When she finished the last sip, Violet wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, then froze, realizing he'd seen the gesture. "Sorry," she whispered, mortified. "For what?" Silas asked. She stared down at her skirt, fingers plucking at the worn fabric. "For eating like that, for being like this." Her voice cracked. "For embarrassing you." Silas's jaw clenched. "Violet, look at me." She didn't. She couldn't. So he crouched in front of her, lowering himself until he was eye level. She had no choice but to meet his gaze. "You didn't embarrass me," he said quietly. "Those people embarrassed themselves." Her breath hitched. Surprise, disbelief, something softer rising beneath the stiff fear. Silas reached into his coat, pulled out the folded packet of papers, her labor contract, and laid it on the bench between them. Then he took out a pencil. "What are you doing?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He simply struck a line through the entire document, bold enough to tear the page underneath, then wrote across it in block letters, "Canceled. Violet May Hartwell is a free woman." He signed his name, dated it, then slid the page toward her. Violet stared at the words as though they were written in a language she'd never learned. "Free? You belong to no one," Silas said. Her lip quivered. Her fingers brushed the paper as though touching something sacred. "Silas, why would you do this? After everything?" "Because you needed help," he said simply. "Because no one else stepped up." She swallowed hard. "You still should have let me go. After what I did to you." Silas looked away, jaw tight. "You didn't do it to me." "I did." Violet's voice broke. "My parents, they said if I didn't marry Cornelius, they'd lose everything. They said I'd be destroying the family, and I let them take me away from you. I let them break us." Silas's hand curled slowly into a fist. He kept his voice even. "What happened after you married him?" Violet glanced around the empty morning street, then whispered, "You wouldn't want to hear it." "I asked," Silas said. "Tell me." She wrapped her arms around herself. "He was cruel, not just words, Silas. He hit me, often, whenever I didn't look the way he wanted, whenever he thought I ate too much, whenever he thought I wasn't grateful enough to be his wife." Silas's eyes darkened like a storm rolling over the ridge. "He embarrassed me in front of servants, called me names, told me no one else would ever want me, that I should be thankful someone as rich as him tolerated a woman shaped like that. Silas exhaled slowly, an attempt to rein himself back in. When he died, Violet continued, I thought I was free, but his family took everything, the money, the house, my clothes, my dignity. They said his heart failed because I stressed him, that I killed him. They created a debt that didn't exist and sold me to pay it off. Silas shut his eyes briefly. Violet! She looked up at him, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. I didn't come looking for you. I didn't expect you to be here. I didn't think I deserved to be seen by you again. She tried to smile but failed, especially not like this. Silas rose, straightening his coat. Come on. Her breath caught. Where are we going? To the mountains, he said. My cabin. You can stay there until you decide what you want to do next. She blinked in confusion. But I'm free, you said. You don't have to take me. No, Silas agreed. I don't. Then why? His jaw softened just a little. Because you look like you're one cold night away from collapsing. Because you got nowhere else to go. Because you deserve better than the way they treated you. He paused. And because I need time to think. Violet nodded slowly. About me? Silas didn't answer. He held out his hand, palm open, steady and patient. Violet hesitated only a moment before placing her trembling fingers into his. They fit, as if 5 years hadn't passed, as if pain and separation and humiliation hadn't rewritten both their lives. Silas didn't squeeze her hand, didn't pull her close, didn't pretend things were fixed, but he didn't let go either. Let's go, he said, and Violet followed the man she once loved, the man she'd thought lost forever, out of Mill Brook, toward the mountains where the past would either heal or break them both all over again. The wagon creaked beneath them as Silas guided the horses toward the winding trail that climbed into the Blue Ridge foothills. The sun had begun to dip behind the hills, turning the sky a washed-out gold. A cold wind swept the road, rattling the pines and carrying the first bite of winter. Violet sat beside him, wrapped in the wool coat he'd loaned her. It was far too big, broad through the shoulders, heavy with the scent of smoke and cedar, but it was warm, and right now warmth felt like a luxury she didn't deserve. Silas didn't speak for the first hour. He kept his eyes on the road, jaw set, reins steady in his broad hands. The silence wasn't cruel. It was careful, fragile, like glass that might shatter if touched too quickly. Violet watched the trees blur past, her fingers knotting nervously in her lap. She wanted to say something, anything, but her throat tightened each time she tried. What words could fill 5 years of pain? What apology could undo the day she left him on that riverbank? Finally, when the sun dipped fully behind the ridge, she whispered, I'm not used to quiet like this. Silas didn't look at her. You'll hear a lot of it up there. I don't mind quiet, she said quickly. I wasn't sure if you were angry. He guided the horses around a fallen branch before answering. I'm not angry, Violet. You sound like you are. I sound like a man thinking, he replied. She swallowed, her breath making a small cloud in the cold air. And what are you thinking? He hesitated, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he was choosing how much to reveal. That when I saw you on that platform, he said slowly, my heart stopped. I didn't think. I just couldn't let them treat you that way. Violet blinked hard, vision blurring. You shouldn't have had to save me. No one should have had to, Silas said. What they did was wrong. Every bit of it. She turned her face away, embarrassed by the heat flooding her cheeks. Most people think I deserved it. Silas frowned. Do you? I don't know, she whispered. Silas didn't respond. Instead, he reached behind him and pulled a thick blanket from the wagon bed. He draped it over her shoulders with a gentleness so unexpected that she sucked in a breath. You're shivering, he murmured. I always do, she said. Cold follows me. Even in the Hartwell house, even in summer. I think fear has a temperature. Silas's grip tightened briefly on the reins. Did he ever? She knew what he was asking. She shook her head. Not the way you mean. He didn't want me. Not like that. I think the idea disgusted him. Her voice dropped. He preferred women half my size and half my age. Silas's jaw stiffened again. Good. Violet blinked. Good? I mean, he corrected quickly, I'm glad he didn't hurt you in that way. I'm not glad he judged you, or starved you, or beat you. His voice dropped lower. I'm not glad any of it happened. Violet nodded slowly, grateful for the honesty in his voice, even the clumsy parts. Silence settled again, this time softer. After another stretch of road, the horses slowed as the path steepened. The world grew darker under the thick canopy. Violet tugged the coat tighter around herself. Do you still live alone? She asked. Yes. You never remarried? Silas exhaled through his nose. No. Violet hesitated, afraid of the answer but needing it. Because of me? He didn't answer right away. The wagon bumped over a deep rut, and he steadied the reins with practiced ease. Finally, he said, Partly. Her breath faltered. Silas, you asked a question, he said, not unkindly. I'm answering it. Her eyes stung again. I didn't come back to ruin your life a second time. You didn't ruin anything. He paused. You broke something, but it didn't stay broken forever. That's not true. Her voice trembled. You had to build a whole life without me. And you lived a nightmare without me, he said quietly. We both lost. The honesty of it hit her like a wave. She wiped her eyes with the corner of the blanket, trying not to sob. As they climbed higher, the trees parted, revealing the mountain valley below, rolling hills fading into dusk, a thin ribbon of river catching the last glint of light. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's why I came here, Silas said. Needed peace. And did you find it? Sometimes. She hesitated. And, now that I'm here, does it take your peace away? He finally turned his head, really looking at her for the first time since the auction. The lamplight hanging from the wagon post caught the green in his eyes. No, he said softly, but it wakes things I put to sleep. Her chest tightened. Silas, not bad things, he added quickly. Just feelings I wasn't expecting to feel again. Violet's breath trembled. Do you regret buying me? No, he said without hesitation, not for a second. The wagon rounded a bend, and suddenly the cabin came into view, tucked into a cradle of pines, smoke curling softly from the chimney. Warm light glowed from the single window. Safe, quiet, waiting. Violet stared at it, suddenly terrified. Are you sure you want me here? Yes, Silas said, voice steady. You need rest, safety, food, and time. I can give you that. And you? She whispered. What do you need? He took a breath, long, deep, steady. I don't know yet, he admitted, but letting you freeze or starve isn't the answer, so we start here. The horses stopped in front of the cabin. Silence settled between them again, but this time it was full, not empty. Violet stepped down from the wagon. Her knees wobbled from exhaustion, nearly giving out. Silas reached for her elbow instinctively, steadying her. His touch was firm, warm, grounding. She looked up at him. He didn't let go. "Welcome home," he said quietly. Not a promise, not a declaration, but a beginning. Snow began falling the very night Violet arrived, thin at first, then thick enough to blur the world beyond the pines. Silas stabled the horses, brought in firewood, and checked the shutters while Violet lingered near the door, unsure if she belonged inside or out. "Come in," Silas said gently. "Cold creeps up faster on the mountain than in town." She stepped through the threshold as though entering a memory, because, in a way, she was. The cabin smelled of pine sap, tanned leather, and the faint sweetness of dried berries. A stone hearth dominated the far wall, throwing warm light across the room. Rugs Silas had tanned himself covered the wooden floor. A simple table, 2 chairs, a bed built of hand-cut logs in the corner, a smaller room off to the side. Home, the home he'd once planned for her. Silas hung his coat on a peg and nodded toward the smaller room. "You'll sleep in there. It's warmer and more private." Violet clutched the blanket tighter around her. "And you?" "I have the loft," he said. "Been sleeping up there for years." He didn't mention the empty space on the main bed. He didn't have to. Violet walked slowly around the cabin, touching nothing but seeing everything. A carved wooden bowl, a stack of books, a sewing basket, a quilt folded with careful hands. "Silas, did you make all this?" "Most of it," he said. "Keeps my hands busy when the nights get long." She brushed her fingers over a set of wooden spoons. "You always were good with your hands." Silas's ears warmed despite the cold. "Sit. I'll heat something for us to eat." She obeyed, lowering herself onto the chair nearest the fire. The heat felt too good, too generous. She held her hands out, watching the flames lick upward. Silas ladled venison stew from a pot hanging over the fire. He placed a bowl before her, along with a thick slice of bread he'd baked that morning. Violet stared at the food as if it were a test. "I don't eat much these days," she murmured. "Eat what you can," Silas replied. "Nothing here is rationed." Violet nodded shakily and took a small bite. The stew was rich, warm, perfectly seasoned. Tears stung her eyes. "Too hot?" Silas asked. She shook her head. I haven't had a meal cooked with care in years." Silas didn't answer. He simply ate his own portion in quiet rhythm, as though sharing a table was the most natural thing in the world, even though it made Violet's heart ache. After dinner, she insisted on cleaning. Silas tried to protest, but she cut him off. "Please, let me do this. Let me feel useful." Silas watched her wash dishes in the tin basin, careful, almost reverent, as though afraid she'd break something that mattered to him. In truth, she already held the most fragile thing he had, his heart, and neither dared speak it aloud yet. Later, when the fire settled into embers, Silas climbed to the loft, while Violet retreated to her small room. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, fingers twisting in her lap. Through the thin floorboards, she heard Silas pace once, then twice, before settling. Only then did she lie down, but sleep didn't come easily. The room was warm, but her body remembered cold cellars, locked doors, long nights with no blankets. Her pulse raced, her breath quickened, then she heard him descend the ladder. "Violet?" His voice was low, steady. "Yes," she whispered into the dark. "You all right?" She hesitated. "Just unused to sleeping alone in a room with a door." Silas paused. She felt him considering. "I'll keep the fire going," he said, "and leave the door open if you want." Relief flooded her. "Yes, please." He reopened the small wooden door, letting warm light spill into her room. He returned to the hearth, stirring the coals until the flames lifted again. "Thank you," she whispered. "Sleep," he replied. Eventually, she did. Days took on gentle rhythm. Silas chopped wood at dawn, muscles flexing with each swing of his axe. Violet watched from the doorway, unsure why the sight made her throat tighten. He hadn't changed. Broad, steady, capable, but loneliness clung to him like the cold. She busied herself sweeping floors, mending clothes, organizing the pantry. The first time Silas returned to the cabin to find everything tidied, he paused in the doorway. "You don't have to do that," he murmured. "I know," she said softly, "but I want to." He nodded once, didn't argue. When he hunted, she helped cure the meat. When he fished, she built a small rack by the stream to dry the catch. When he struggled to repair the cabin roof alone, she climbed up beside him with a hammer. "You shouldn't be up here," he said. "Why not?" "It's dangerous." "I've lived through worse." He swallowed hard. "I know." Her presence became woven into the rhythm of the mountain, not a burden, not an obligation, something steadier, quieter, like hands smoothing the rough edges of a life lived alone too long. One morning, after a hard frost, Silas found Violet in the yard gathering fallen branches for kindling. Her breath puffed in white clouds. Her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. She brushed snow from her hair. "You don't need to do chores outside," he said, stepping toward her. "I can handle sticks and snow," she replied with a small smile. "I know you can." His eyes softened. "Just don't freeze doing it." She laughed, soft, surprised, beautiful. The sound hit Silas like a punch. He hadn't heard her laugh like that since they were barely more than kids, washing clothes in the river and stealing kisses behind the cedar trees. She knelt to gather one last branch and winced. Silas's posture tightened instantly. "What's wrong?" "Just sore," she said quickly. "My hip. It happens sometimes." "Why?" Her silence told him everything. "What did they do to you, Violet?" His voice was low, dangerous. "Please, Silas," she murmured, "let it stay in the past." But he shook his head. "One day you'll tell me." "Maybe," she whispered. He held her gaze until she looked away. Nights were the hardest, not for danger, but for closeness. They read by firelight, Silas tracing the words with a slow finger, Violet listening with her head tilted just slightly toward him. He'd always read aloud for her, since she'd never been given proper schooling. She caught on quickly, always had, but she loved the sound of his voice more than the words themselves. One night, as he read from a book of mountain lore, Violet's eyes drifted downward to his hands. Strong, rough, capable. Those hands had built this cabin, held her when she cried as a girl, reached for her on the riverbank the night she told him she had to marry another man. Now they rested quietly in his lap, but she could still feel the memory of his touch like an echo under her skin. She turned her face away, heart racing. Silas closed the book. "You're tired," he said. "A little," she whispered. He stood, banked the fire, and walked her to the doorway of her room. The glow from the embers framed him in soft orange light. "Door open?" he asked. "Yes," she murmured. He nodded, retreating toward the loft. But halfway up the ladder he paused. "Violet." She looked up at him. "I'm glad you're here." Her breath caught. "I am too." Silas held her gaze a heartbeat longer, something unspoken, fragile, dangerous, shimmering between them, before disappearing into the shadows above. Violet closed her eyes, the ache in her chest not painful this time, but tender. She was home. Not fully. Not yet. But closer than she'd ever been. Winter settled deep over Blue Ridge, the kind of cold that turned breath to frost and silence to something heavy, almost sacred. Yet inside the cabin, life grew warmer, slowly, quietly, like embers coaxed into flame, until the past found a way in. It began with the letters Violet didn't know Silas kept. One evening, while Silas was out checking his traps, Violet was tidying the loft as she always did after he left, folding blankets, shaking out the furs, sweeping bits of pine needles he'd dragged in on his boots. She bent to pick up a stray glove, but her foot struck something tucked under the low bed frame, a tin box, dented, cold, locked. Curiosity stole her breath. She shouldn't open it. She knew she shouldn't, but the lid wasn't fully latched. It looked as though Silas had been opening and closing it often, maybe not even realizing the clasp had loosened. Violet hesitated. Then, with trembling fingers, she lifted the lid. Inside were letters, dozens, some sealed and yellowed, some torn open, some crumpled, edges smudged as though held by hands that weren't steady. She lifted the one on top and froze. The handwriting was hers. Her breath hitched. Her throat tightened painfully. "Dear Silas, I'm sorry. I wish—" The ink blurred under her tears before she could read more. The next one, "Please don't hate me. I never wanted to—" Another, "If there were another way, I would run to you. I would choose you." Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the edge of the bed. She had written those letters the night before her wedding, the night her parents locked her in a room until she agreed to obey. She'd slipped the letters to a sympathetic maid, begging her to mail them, but Silas never responded, not one word. She thought he burned them. She thought he forgot. She thought he moved on, but he hadn't. He'd saved everyone. Another letter fell open in her hands, one she didn't recognize. The handwriting was harsher, angrier, Silas's. The page trembled as she read. "I waited at the river until the lantern went out. I waited at the cedar tree until sunrise. I waited until my father's horse collapsed beneath me. You didn't come." Another, "They told me you chose wealth over a life with me. I pray they lied, but I can't forgive what I don't understand." And a final one, unfinished, scribbled and crossed out a dozen times. "If ever you return, if ever you need, if ever you say my name again, I won't turn away." Violet's breath broke. She pressed her shaking fingers over her lips to keep from sobbing aloud. He had loved her. He had waited for her. He had written and rewritten words he was never able to send. And he had kept every piece of her she thought the world had thrown away. Footsteps sounded outside, crunching through snow. Silas! Violet panicked. She stuffed the letters back into the tin, pushed it under the bed, and hurried down the ladder just as the door swung open. Silas stepped inside, snow dusting his shoulders, rifle slung across his back. His eyes landed immediately on her, her cheeks flushed, hands trembling, breath uneven. He frowned. "You all right?" She nodded too quickly. "Yes, just startled." He studied her longer than was comfortable. Violet forced herself to keep her face still, but she knew he could sense something. Silas set the rifle aside and took off his gloves. Something happened. It wasn't a question. Violet swallowed. Not something bad. Silas waited. She almost told him, but the words tangled in her mouth, and fear, deep, familiar, overwhelming, rose faster than courage. I was just thinking about the past, she whispered. His expression softened. There's a lot of that between us. Yes, she breathed. There is. The next morning brought a different kind of trouble. Silas had gone down to check the footpath toward town, a weekly ritual to see whether snow had blocked the lowland road fully. Violet was stirring a pot of porridge when she heard it. Horse hooves, several of them, approaching fast. Her heart slammed into her ribs. She wiped her hands on her apron, stepped onto the porch, and froze. 3 men rode into the clearing, breath of their horses steaming in the icy air. One wore a long black coat trimmed with fur, his posture stiff with entitlement. Marcus Hartwell, her dead husband's brother. "Violet!" he shouted, sliding from the saddle with a swagger that made her stomach twist. "You thought you could hide? Thought you could run from your obligations?" She backed toward the door. "I have no obligations to you." Silas canceled. "You don't get to decide what's real," Marcus snarled. "The contract was ours. You are ours." She tightened her grip on the doorframe. "I'm a free woman." Marcus's smile curled like rot. "Not anymore. Not when I say otherwise." One of the men stepped toward her, reaching for her arm. Violet flinched backward. "Don't touch me." But the man kept coming. Then a voice, cold, sharp, lethal, split the air. "You take one more step, I take your hand." The men spun. Silas stood at the tree line, rifle raised, jaw clenched so tight she could see muscle jumping near his ear. Marcus sneered. "This doesn't concern you, mountain man." "It concerns me the moment you show up on my land," Silas growled. "Step away from her." Marcus snorted. "She's a widow in debt. Her contract belongs to the Hartwell family. You bought her, didn't you? Fine. She's worth double now. Sell her back." Silas's grip tightened on the rifle. "She isn't for sale." Marcus's eyes darkened. "Everything is for sale, Thorne." Silas took one slow, deadly step forward. Not Violet. Snowflakes drifted between them, landing silently on boots, on coats, on barrels of guns that were suddenly far too close together. Violet felt her entire body trembling, but not from cold, from fear, and something fiercer, something rising from the ashes of every humiliation she'd endured. She stepped to Silas's side. Marcus's eyes widened. "So you're living with him now? Disgusting." Silas lifted the rifle another inch. "Say one more word," he said softly, "and you'll be spitting teeth into the snow." Marcus hissed at his men. "We'll be back, with papers, with the law. She owes us. We'll collect." He mounted his horse with a glare that promised violence. The 3 men turned and thundered down the trail. Silas didn't lower the rifle until the last hoofbeat faded. Then he looked at Violet, really looked at her, as if searching for cracks. "Did they hurt you?" "No." He exhaled, a breath full of fury and fear. "They'll be back." "Yes," Violet whispered. Silas stepped closer, voice dropping low. "Then we face it. Together." Her breath caught. He meant it. Not protection, not obligation, not pity. Together. Snow hammered the mountains for 2 straight days, turning the world white and swallowing every sound beyond the cabin walls. Silas sharpened his axe by the fire, every stroke ringing with a precision Violet knew meant he was thinking too hard, planning too far ahead, preparing. They won't come in a storm this heavy, Violet whispered, more hope than certainty. They'll come because the storm is heavy, Silas replied without looking up. Men like Marcus hide behind laws and papers when it suits them. When it doesn't, they use the dark. Violet felt a cold coil of dread tighten beneath her ribs. Each hour that passed brought an ache to Silas's movements, shoulders tensing, gaze shifting to windows, jaw clenched tight. She recognized it, the same readiness he once carried when he hunted predators, a readiness to kill if he had to. Just after dusk, it happened. 3 sharp knocks, not frantic, not polite, a rhythm meant to strike fear. Silas rose to his full height, body going deadly still. He motioned Violet behind him. She obeyed, but not all the way. Not this time. He cracked the door. Marcus Hartwell stood on the porch, snow crusting his coat, a sneer fixed beneath his mustache. Behind him were 2 men, not the hired thugs from before. These wore deputy badges on their vests. "I brought the law," Marcus said smugly, as promised. Silas opened the door just wide enough to speak. "The law belongs in town, not on my mountain in a blizzard." One deputy stepped forward, holding a folded paper in a gloved hand. "We have a claim for collection. Violet Hartwell owes the Hartwell estate $150. Failure to return her constitutes harboring stolen property." Silas's eyes iced over. "She's a woman, not stolen goods." "That's not my concern," the deputy replied. "It's mine," Silas growled. Marcus smirked. "Thorne, be reasonable. Hand her over. We'll take her down the mountain safely, assuming she behaves." Violet felt her stomach twist. Silas didn't move. "And if I don't?" Marcus turned to the deputies, raising his voice. "You hear that? He's refusing lawful order. That's obstruction." The second deputy nodded. "We'll take her by force if we must." Something inside Violet snapped. Before Silas could speak, she stepped forward, pushing open the door and planting herself firmly beside him. The cold hit her skin like knives, but she didn't flinch. "You will not take me," Violet said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "I am not in debt to you. You fabricated numbers to enslave me. I worked your fields, your kitchens, your parlor for 2 years. You were lazy, overfed, and useless." Marcus spat. Silas's rifle lifted a fraction. Violet didn't stop. "And your brother beat me until I bled. You watched. You laughed. You told the neighbors I drove him to an early grave. You lied about everything." Marcus's face reddened. "Shut your mouth." "No." Violet's voice cut through the snowstorm like a bell. "I won't." The deputies shifted uneasily. Silas looked at her, not with fear, but with something like awe. Marcus stepped forward, pointing at her with a shaking finger. "You're coming with me, now." Silas's voice dropped to something lethal. "Take one more step." Marcus did. Silas moved faster than the deputies could draw. He seized Marcus by the front of his coat and slammed him into the porch beam, snow exploding from the impact. The deputies fumbled for their guns. Too slow. Silas ripped Marcus's pistol from his holster and flung it into the darkness. "She's not your property. She's not anyone's property. And if you try to touch her again, I'll bury you under this mountain where no law will ever find you." The deputies froze, unsure whether to intervene or run. Violet stepped closer to Silas, placing her hand lightly on his arm. "Silas?" He looked at her. She shook her head once, not to stop him, but to steady him. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. The deputies exchanged glances, realizing something they hadn't expected. The woman wasn't resisting him. She was choosing him. "We can't force her," the older deputy finally muttered to Marcus. "Not if she refuses. That's the law." Marcus's face contorted with rage. "I'll be back, with more men, with a judge, with—" Silas shoved him off the porch and slammed the door. Inside, Violet sagged against the wall, breath shaking. Silas set the rifle down and cupped her face with both hands, his touch trembling with leftover fury and unbearable relief. "You stood up to them," he murmured. "You stood with me." "I'll stand with you again," she whispered, "as many times as it takes." Something warm and dangerous flickered in his eyes, something she had once known intimately, something she had feared she'd never see again. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "And this is my home," she replied. He didn't argue. The storm lasted through the night, howling against the windows like a living thing, scratching at the shutters, rattling the chimney. But inside the cabin, the world felt still, warm, golden, suspended between danger and hope. Silas stoked the fire until it glowed bright, then hung his coat to dry. Violet sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea he'd made for her. The steam curled around her face, softening the trembling that still clung to her breath. Neither spoke for a long time. Silas finally pulled out the chair across from her. "They'll try again." "I know," she said, "but they won't win." She looked into his eyes, the same green that had watched her with longing years ago, the same green that had looked shattered the night she left. Now they held something different, conviction, and something deeper, something she didn't dare name. Violet placed her mug down. "Silas, do you ever regret rescuing me?" His eyebrows drew together. "Never." "I brought trouble to your doorstep." He shook his head. "Trouble found you long before you came here. I just put myself between you and it." Her throat tightened. "But why? After everything, after the way we ended—" Silas leaned back slightly, his voice an even, quiet rumble. "We didn't end. We got torn apart. There's a difference." The words struck her like heat spreading through her chest. She lowered her gaze. "I don't want to be torn away again." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "You won't be, not unless you choose to leave?" Silas rarely spoke in maybes. He spoke in certainties, in truths. That was who he was. A man carved from mountains, steady, stubborn, unmovable. But now something softer slipped into his tone. "Violet," he said, fingertips brushing the edge of her sleeve, "I can fight for you. I can protect you, but I can't decide for you. Do you want to stay? Truly stay?" Her eyes lifted to his. "Yes," she whispered, without fear or hesitation. "I want to stay." He exhaled like someone who had been holding breath for 5 long years. The fire crackled. The storm moaned. And they sat there, closer than they had been since youth, close enough for their hands to meet between the wood grain of the table. Silas's fingers wrapped around hers slowly, carefully, like he was touching something fragile and precious. "Then this is your home now." Her breath shivered. "Only if it's your home with me." He stood and pulled her gently to her feet. For a moment, he simply looked at her, her soft cheeks flushed by firelight, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes fuller than they had been in years. Then he touched her cheek with the back of his hand, voice barely above a whisper. "You're safe here," he murmured. "You always were." Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes, not from fear, but from the impossible fullness of being wanted. truly, deeply wanted. Silas rested his forehead against hers, the warmth of him chasing away every cold memory. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, two souls, once broken, once separated, sat wrapped in firelight and the fragile, blooming promise of a life rebuilt together. A promise not sealed yet, not spoken, not claimed, not yet. Some stories don't start with love. They start with loss, with shame, with a woman standing alone on an auction block and a man trying to forget the pieces of his heart he buried years ago. But sometimes, when fate is stubborn enough, two lost paths find their way back to each other. If you're listening right now, wherever you are in the world, remember this: love that was meant for you doesn't disappear. It waits. It survives storms, years, even heartbreak. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And if you still believe in second chances, stay close. Your next story is coming.